All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Mark Ortiz, and I'll just be telling you a little bit today about the project that we'll be working on this year through the EnvironMentors program. So I'll start by just saying a little bit about myself. So as I mentioned, my name is Mark Ortiz. I graduated with a BA in Environmental Studies from the University of Alabama. That's where I grew up in 2015. And then after that, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and graduated in 2022 with my PhD in geography. So I'm now a presidential postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Geography here at Penn State University. And basically what that means is that right now I do research full-time. And currently I'm working on a book project on global youth climate activism. And this project features interviews with young people, which I define as below the age of 30, from over 30 countries around the world. And so I've done about 50 interviews for that book project so far, and I'll be continuing to do those interviews throughout this coming year, 2023. And really the point of that book is to better understand the histories of youth climate activism, which has become a pretty major force in the last decade and really in the last 5 years that's really having impacts on climate change policy. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about my research, you can visit my website, which is linked down here at the bottom of this presentation, and see a little bit more about the work that I've been doing. And so I'll just say a little bit about my approach, how I approach scholarship, and how I approach what kinds of methods I use and things like that. So I would say that I'm a youth political geographer and a qualitative social scientist. So basically this means that I try to understand how children, adolescents, and young adults participate in politics and how they do that differently than older people. I think often when we think about politics, we often imagine the very old people in, for example, the US Congress. Many of our senators and representatives are very old, elderly people and don't necessarily match the youth of the general population. So there are a lot of barriers to young people's participation in politics. But what I try to do is understand how young people both break down those barriers to their participation and participate even despite some of the limitations. And also this means, as a qualitative social scientist, this means that I primarily use what are called qualitative methods rather than quantitative methods. So the qualitative methods that I use include interviews, ethnographic fieldwork, which we'll talk about if you work with me, participant observation, and archival and media analysis. And some cool examples, or some examples that I find really fun and enjoyable in my research, are kind of studying how young people use social media, including Instagram and TikTok, to communicate their political messages. So a lot of young people are using these participatory media platforms to create videos and different multimedia content that really can provide new windows into how young people perceive the world around them. So also very important to my approach is that I'm a public scholar. This means that in addition to writing for other academics, as in journal articles that many academics write, I also try to publish for broader audiences, for the general public, and do very community engaged research. So for example, this is a picture of myself and a group called the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective, and I've worked with them on the leadership team for several years now since I lived in North Carolina. So I really try to contribute my research findings and my research skills to community-based groups as well. So a little bit of background on the types of research that we would be doing this year through the EnvironMentors program. So this really comes out of my long-term research interest in young people and climate politics. So young people have been present in global climate negotiations since 1992, and you can see a picture of that, that kind of experience at the top. This is a 12-year-old who actually spoke at one of the climate negotiations I attended. So I should have mentioned earlier that I do, as part of my research, I've attended a number of the United Nations climate change negotiations around the world and actually observed youth participation and actually spoken in those events myself as well. So some of the questions that we'll be asking this year, if you work with me, are things like, while young people have a growing presence in formal politics like the UN, what are the limits of this voice or a seat, having a seat at the table in these kinds of institutions? Some of the other questions we'll be asking: how do young people actually perceive their participation in politics? Do they think that they are, should be more included, aren't fully included, or are they satisfied with their level of inclusion? What types of things do young people think could change about how they're involved in policy? And then one of the final questions is, do growing youth climate movements actually influence policymaking? Are these activist organizations that young people are building, like Fridays for Future, the school strikes, which you'll see below, this bottom picture, are those actually working to move policy in different directions? So the project that we would be working on this year takes a little bit more of a specific focus on exploring youth activism and the politics of climate change in Pennsylvania. So for this project, we would turn our focus to Pennsylvania and explore some of the youth activism around climate change in the state and how it may be influencing policy at either the local level or state level. And so we could actually begin by choosing a couple of different case study cities. For example, we could think about Pittsburgh or Philadelphia as two of the major urban centers of Pennsylvania and explore activism in those cities. But we'd really have a little bit of flexibility in terms of which cities or which towns we would choose to focus on in Pennsylvania. And these could be based on your own interests or where you're from in the state. And so basically we'll be accomplishing this research project using some of these methods I mentioned a couple of slides ago. Basically, we would be using interviews with youth advocates, with potentially policy officials in local government or in state government. We would be doing archival analysis, so tracing media coverage of youth activism and climate policy in the state. Social media analysis, so I'd introduce you to some of those tools and techniques. And then potentially, we'd be doing some on-site fieldwork in any of the case study towns that we chose. So potentially Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, or maybe we don't do that on-site fieldwork, but we do kind of digital fieldwork. We could talk about that more as well. And what I hope you'll learn by the end of the summer, working with me in the EnvironMentors program, the first thing is that through this research opportunity, you'll be introduced to qualitative research methods. These are used both in academic research like I do, but also across various industries. So you can think about marketing, public relations, or PR, and journalism as a few industries which use these kinds of qualitative methods to establish insights and to tell stories. So the second thing, you'll also gain an understanding of how young people such as yourselves can impact policymaking. And you'll become familiar with how to study the human or social dimensions of environmental change. So one of the big things that scholars are doing now is not just focusing on the science of environmental change, but also the social science or the human science of climate change. How do we understand humans' relationship to the environment and how that's changed over time and how that might change into the future? And then finally, through mentored co-writing opportunities and creative research outputs, I hope to give my student mentees an opportunity to hone their writing skills and learn how to become multimedia storytellers. So similar to what youth climate movements do, we could actually think about all sorts of creative outputs that would be pretty fun to make. We could think about creating a TikTok series of our research findings, for example. So I hope to allow you all to really exercise your own creativity in terms of the kinds of outputs that we're developing as a team. And those are the things I hope you'll learn, and really hope you work with me through the EnvironMentors program. And we'll be happy to talk to you and meet you soon. Thanks so much.